Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Preservation for Easy Discovery, Access, and Usability, brought to you by Library Journal and EBSCO. My name is Rebecca Joswick, and I will be your moderator, but before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over with you. Your screen is completely customizable. You can resize any of the windows and move them around, so feel free to adjust as needed to get the most out of your screen space. If you accidentally close any of your windows, you can bring them back up by clicking the appropriate widget down at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for our presenters, and I sure hope you do, you can submit those through that Q&A window anytime. We will save some room at the end to address those questions. You can find a copy of today's slide deck in the resource list window, and you'll be able to download your CE certificate from the certification window once you've met the viewing requirements. And you can tweet us today at Library Journal with the hashtag LJEBSCO. And finally, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, click on that Help widget on the bottom left of your screen, and you can find some system requirements and FAQs. If you don't find a solution, just type a note through the Q&A, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. And I am pleased to introduce our speakers today. We have Andrew Nagy, Director of SAS Technology at EBSCO, and Matthew Addis, CTO and founder at Arkivum. And without any further ado, I am going to pass the baton to our speakers.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm really excited to be joining Library Journal on this presentation again, as well as my colleague here, Matthew from Arkivum. We're really excited about this session. I think this is something that's fairly new for EBSCO and something that we're really interested about talking more about with our customers and our patrons to better understand how we can help to explore and make available all of the great digital content or even the physical content that your library is holding. I think it was about a little bit more than a year ago, EBSCO and Arkivum really started to talk about and have a conversation about how we can better help our customers who have been coming to us for years now about the need to better support, on building a digital archive or institutional repositories, being able to collect and gather all of this content that has been built at the library for so long, create a way to manage and store and work with, as well as to also make that content available to patrons through discovery experience, being able to better support libraries around that great activity that so many libraries have been working on for so long, and being able to bring that content into the digital world and make that available, something that we are really excited about being able to help our customers do. It's something that is really important to the mission of libraries over the years, is better think about how we are preserving our content. I think libraries have really been thinking about preserving their collection for a very long time. But we haven't been thinking about that as much from the digitization efforts that we're all doing. So let's dive into this a little bit more. I think what we're going to do throughout the day, throughout this hour, is Matthew and I are going to walk you through how we've been partnering EBSCO and Arkivum to bring a great set of solutions and services to our customers to really make managing all of the digital content that the library has been producing, being able to manage that much more effectively, and also being able to bring that to the patron very easily and conveniently through many different methods of discovery. So I'd like to walk through that a little bit and give you that introduction before I hand it off to Matthew to really talk more about the technology aspect of the solution. So we all remember these collections. I'd love to start with a joke, right? We all like to have a good laugh. And when I show this to so many libraries, we always kind of get a little bit of a chuckle. We remember these technologies, and I bet that you have patrons in your community, researchers in your community, who are still holding on to these technologies, right? And the question is how much longer are these technologies going to be sustainable? Are they going to be usable? What can we do with this content, right? Somebody has research work that's been done some of, stored in or built in some of these older, outdated technologies that they're still holding on to. It might still be sitting on a computer somewhere or on a server somewhere. But we want to make sure that that content, that intellectual property, all that great work that was done is preserved in perpetuity for our community to be able to access in the future. And this is really what we're talking about today, is how do we make this content and how do we store and manage this content and how do we make it available for future use. Libraries have been really collecting and building these collections over the years. I used to work in an academic library many years ago, and I remember just the really incredible collections that our library had. Some libraries have great collections of the local region, right? Maybe some historical information, maybe old maps, maybe old postcards, old blueprints, photos of the community as they were a while back. Maybe some great donations that have come in from the community, maybe some great research work that has been done in the past. But also, we're also thinking about the stuff that's happening today, the content that's being created today. And a lot of this, if not most of it, if not all of it, really is being born digitally. And so what are we doing with this content as our researchers, as our workers, as our scientists in our communities are collecting and building content to support their research? Where's all the data that they're using to support their research? Where's that going? And how is that being stored and managed and preserved? And as well as the research output, the content that's being published and produced, how are we making sure that that content is available for our community going forward into the future, but also being able to store and manage that? How are we storing that? How are we managing that content? And how are we making that available to our patrons today? This is just kind of gives you a good understanding as to what libraries are working with, right? All the way from your preprints, what your researchers are creating and working on producing, your theses and dissertations for those active students and active researchers, but maybe lots of other things, even things like software code that's being produced, 3D objects, institutional publications and institutional memory, faculty archives. There's so many different aspects of content that is being created at this institution, at this library. And how are we managing all of that content? Really, what is at risk? And really what's at risk is that this digital content could no longer be accessible. It could be lost, and this is a significant problem. Something that libraries are not thinking enough about. As we've been thinking about, how we preserve our physical collection, we need to also be thinking about our digital collection as well. I've heard from libraries that have survived natural disasters where their physical collection was impacted by storms, by weather, and they have plans for how to deal with that. But then we've talked to libraries about their digital collections and what happens when that gets impacted by some sort of issue. Do you have plans for that digital content? And so many people say, oh, yeah, no problem. No problem at all. It's stored on a drive somewhere. We've got it all backed up on a drive somewhere. And what we're trying to help libraries understand is that storing it on a drive somewhere, storing it online, on Dropbox, on Google Drive, that is not a preservation environment. That is not an archive. That is simply just storage. And really what we want to talk about is how we are making that content preservable for future use, right? If I just store that WordPerfect file or that Lotus 123 file on a server somewhere, how do we know that that file is going to continue to be available and accessible going into the future? We also have issues of bit rot and file corruption where data can be modified over the years just sitting in storage, right? A lot of cases storage is on physical medium, and so a physical medium can be impacted and can be changed and modified over the years. And what happens when that file is no longer accessible because some of the bits were physically modified, right? That could be one of the issues that we're dealing with today. but also how does that evolve over time through things like data corruption, through bit rot, no longer supported file formats, right? What if in 50 years from now that WordPerfect file, we just have no way of opening it? We have no software to interact with it. So really what we want to do is start to address and help libraries manage the storage of their collection, but also be able to preserve their collection and make sure that their collection is accessible, not only today, but going into the future. So what should preservation do for the library? Well, it should be able to integrate with an existing collection. It should be able to safeguard that collection, that digital collection of content. It should be able to preserve it and also be able to provide access. Right? That's the most important thing, is we're here to make sure that that content is accessible. So what does safeguarding look like? Well, I just want to kind of give a high-level overview here before I hand it off to Matthew to really dive into how this system actually works. But what is safeguarding? Well, safeguarding makes sure that we have multiple copies across multiple geographic locations, right? We might have multiple backups, but if it's all sitting in the same building or in the same library or on the same campus, what happens if there is a natural disaster or there is some other issue that challenges the ability to access that content, right? So what we want to be able to do is make sure that there are multiple copies spread out across multiple locations to ensure that that content is accessible from a backup perspective. We want to be able to make sure that the quality of that data remains, that we're always going to check it. We're going to check it for viruses. We're going to check it for encryption, and we're going to make sure that there's an audit trail, but also be able to provide fixity checks, which means that if we detect a change of the file, something no longer is exactly the same as it used to be able to fix that data. Maybe that happens on ingest. Maybe there's data that's corrupted when we're loading it into the system, or maybe that means that that data has been corrupted over time. We want to make sure that we can fix that and always make sure it is available. The safeguarding is really important to have as a part of your collection to make sure that your data is secure, it's safe. But also preservation. Preservation is also critical as well too. And that's where we talked about some of those old dated technologies, like your Lotus 123 files, your WordPerfect data, right? Microsoft Word is not a preservation format. So what we want to help libraries do is get access to all of their digital files and transform them into a preservable format. So you can see here in this example, what we've done is we've taken this Microsoft Word document and we've converted it to an archivable PDF version. And what this is doing is this is using an open standard that is addressing what is the best way to preserve a document. What is the best way to preserve an image? What is the best way to preserve a video file, an audio file, or all sorts of other things, those things that we talked about? What is the best way? So through the services that Arkivum brings to EBSCO and to our customers is having that ability to map all of those different types of files and transform them into an archivable, safe format. So I think that's also really important, is that we have that preservation strategy in place as well. So one of the other things that we're talking about in terms of content that's born digitally is how are we also working with that, right? So we want to be able to ensure that we're integrated into that repository workflow. So as faculty, as researchers, as the patrons are depositing content into the digital collection, into the repository, or whether it's a librarian or an archivist working at the library who's depositing content into that repository, we want to make sure that as that content is cataloged into the repository, that we are also taking that content, those digital files that represent that content, and put that into a preservation-safe environment. But also to be able to make sure that we expose that content for accessibility, for discovery for today. So we want to be able to make sure that that content is discoverable. And we also want to be able to retain the metadata about that as well, because you want to know where is your content. How is it being stored? Where is it being managed? And so being able to not only keep as a part of the preservation system a copy of the technical metadata, which means information about the file, we also want to be able to capture that bibliographic metadata so that we can find that content internally in our preservation system, so that we can easily pull that up if we need to and make that content available, but also be able to contribute that data into a discovery environment to be able to find and access all of those great collections very easily for the patrons, so that patrons can search and discover the content that we are archiving. So I'd like to kind of wrap up my part of this presentation by saying that we're really excited about working with Arkivum on their solution, which is called Perpetua, and being able to bring that solution to our customers so that we can help our customers ensure that their content is accessible and preserved for the future. One of the things that I think is really, really important about why we've created our partnership with Arkivum is that their solution is built on open source technologies, which means that there is no proprietary lock-in to their technologies. This means that as you're thinking about where's my data living and where's it going to be in the future, that we can make sure that it is always available and that you can always get access to that content because it's not using any sort of proprietary data formats or anything like that, that we're using open source technologies and we're using open standards. And all of these services are supported by open APIs, which makes it really, really critical when evaluating what type of storage environment and preservation service that your library is going to use for its content. Last but not least, it is a fully managed service. So we are here to help you through the entire process and make sure that this solution is working critically for you and very successfully. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, and I'm really excited to hear more from Matthew about the solution and services. So Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself and take it from here?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Matthew Addis from Arkivum. What I'm going to do is follow on from Andrew by providing some suggestions on how to go about doing digital preservation in practice. And that's going to include lots of pointers to some great community resources that are there to help you on the way. If I sound a bit sniffly, then that's because I've got a bit of a cold at the moment, so my apologies for that. But that's not going to stop me. But I am going to cover quite a lot of ground. But the slides do include notes and URLs, so don't worry about having to write anything down. And then after we've looked a bit about digital preservation good practice, then I'll spend some time looking at how that good practice can be achieved through Perpetua in a really quite a simple and easy to do way. So how do we go about putting preservation into practice, doing all those things that Andrew talked about? Well, Andrew's already nicely explained the principles of digital preservation, so we're off to a good start. And one thing I do want to emphasize is that digital preservation really is an ongoing activity. It's not a one-off or one-shot process. Digital content does need continual intervention to make sure it remains alive and accessible. So digital preservation activities need to continue for as long as content needs to be kept or used. And that cycle of digital preservation is illustrated quite nicely in the Digital Curation Centre's lifecycle model, which I've shown here. And that's a really good resource, actually, for assessing all the things that you could or should be doing for digital preservation. And it comes with some handy checklists for each of the stages. And there's really no shortage of things that you can or should be doing for digital preservation. And I've listed just a few of them here. And many of these are actually quite labour intensive. For example, planning what to do, acquiring or appraising digital content, applying digital preservation actions, or even making a business case for sustained funding so you can keep going and ensure that that digital content remains accessible and useful in the future. And the problem is that within many organizations, for example, libraries, there's only a small number of people, for example, librarians or archivists, who are actually expected to do all of these things. Therefore, practical digital preservation often becomes a question of how these people can do as much as possible with actually minimal resources or budgets. So I'm going to look at 4 aspects of that problem. Firstly, how can you make a business case to get funding for digital preservation? How can you start simple and work up, which is important if your resources are limited? And thirdly, how can techniques such as automation reduce burden on people, those sort of labor-intensive or manual activities? And then finally, how digital preservation can be integrated into your wider environment. It's easier to apply and you can benefit from the results. So if we take each of those in turn for a couple of minutes, I won't spend too much time on business cases other than to say that they really are important. Because digital preservation is an ongoing activity, you need ongoing funding to keep it going. And there's a great resource from the Digital Preservation Coalition on how to make business cases that you might want to have a look at. And likewise, Arkivum provides our own ebook based on the experience we have in helping a lot of our customers with the challenge of making a business case and sustaining funding. The second thing on my list was how to start simple and work up. And it's really important to get the basics of digital preservation in place first. This is about building a solid foundation before moving on to more sophisticated and advanced techniques. And actually in digital preservation, there's a real danger that organizations think that the problem is too hard and too complicated, and they delay taking action or do nothing. And that's often the worst thing that you can do. Because as Andrew said, sort of digital content doesn't look after itself. But thankfully, there's a whole range of resources out there to help with this, some of which I'm showing here. And they range from simple one-pagers through to whole ISO standards on trusted digital repositories. But they do mean that any organization can get started with digital preservation, even though those with very limited resources. And once you've started, you know you're at least on the right track. So let me give you a couple of examples. The first is the National Digital Stewardship Alliance preservation levels. And the idea here is that you start at level 1 and you work across. So, for example, for data safeguarding, you can start off simple, and it talks about keeping more than one copy of your data and storing those copies in different geographic locations. And then at higher levels, it goes on to talk about things like fixity checking and repair of data corruption. Likewise, the NDSA levels talk about simple things like making inventories of what file formats you have. And then it goes on to talk about what you can do next. For example, looking at techniques such as automated file format migration. The other example I wanted to highlight is the recently released Digital Preservation Coalition Rapid Assessment Model, or RAM for short. And this builds on several of the other models in the field, including the NDSA levels. And it's the service capabilities in RAM that cover a range of practical things that you can do for safeguarding, preservation, managing metadata, and making content accessible. So all those things that Andrew talked about earlier. And there's some practical guidelines in here on what you should be doing. And again, the lower levels are the places that you should start at. And you can see here that RAM covers activities such as replicating content, generating checksums, fixity checking, identifying file formats, metadata extraction, migration, emulation, and more. So I'd encourage you to at least have a look at the RAM model, see where you are today, and use it to determine where you need to be going forwards. And I'll show you a bit as we go on about how Perpetua supports RAM. The third area on my list was automation. And that's because all these activities, even at the basic level of digital preservation, can still take quite a lot of time and effort. They're potentially quite manual processes. And that's where automation comes in. Automation is about using computers or machines to do stuff that people would otherwise have to do manually. And in the case of digital preservation, that means using software to automate digital preservation activities and workflows. And that helps you get more done when you've got limited staff or budgets. So if automation means using software tools and systems, well, where do you get those from and what can you use? And there's quite a lot of digital preservation tools and systems out there. I suggest having a look at Copter, which is a community resource, and it lists about 450 of those tools. And quite helpfully, it categorizes them by the type of content they can process, for example, documents or email or audiovisual, and the stage in the digital preservation lifecycle that those tools can be applied to. So what that means in practice is that you can look at the activities of digital preservation from the Digital Curation Center lifecycle model, that circular thing I showed at the start. You can look at what level of maturity you want to achieve using the NDSA levels or DPC RAM, and then you can go to Copter and find out what tools you can use to achieve that. And indeed, I mean, the Power Tool Grid does exactly that. It shows you what tools are available for each stage of the digital preservation process. So you can assess whether automation is feasible because there's tool support available. But the one thing I did want to point out is that there are no tools that cover all the stages of digital preservation or all the content types that you might have. So if you are going to build your own digital preservation infrastructure and do digital preservation yourself, then there's plenty of work that's probably still going to be needed to combine these different tools into an end-to-end solution. And that, of course, is where Perpetua comes in, so a bit more on that later as well. That's probably sounding a bit daunting, all those different tools that you could use. So again, I suggest going back to the idea of starting simple and working up. So start by determining what content you have by using things like file format identification and characterization tools. And there's just a few of the tools that you can use here. And those tools actually do quite a lot of useful things for you. So they will help you identify what file formats you have, either using a registry such as Pronom from the National Archives in the UK or by MIME type. They will generate checksums for you. They will help you identify duplicate files, and they will extract metadata. This could be technical details of a file type and its content, for example, video codecs or bit rates for audiovisual files, or it will extract descriptive metadata, for example, authors and titles from documents. But the important thing is that once you've identified what type of content you have, then you can make informed decisions on what to do with it next. For example, converting it into formats better suited for access or for long-term preservation. And that conversion is called file format migration or file format normalization. It's actually quite a complex topic. We could do a whole webinar on that alone. But one place that you can get started with is NARA in the US, and they've just released their guidelines on preferred file formats. And they do that for images and video and documents and email and web and databases and geospatial data and so on. And that gives a pointer to whether you might want to normalize your files into a preferred format, for example, based on their file format risk assessment. So that's a really helpful resource for helping you decide what further preservation actions you might need after you've identified what types of content that you have. But whatever you do, no matter how far you go on that sort of journey, always keep the bits safe. So remember to get data safeguarding in place as well. And there's plenty of good practice here as well. Basically, you make multiple copies of your data. You keep those copies in different geographic locations. You actively manage those copies by migrating to new storage systems and checking for loss of data integrity. And many of those steps can be automated, and there are both open source and commercial solutions available, including Arkivum. And if you want to assess those solutions, then I'd suggest having a look at the preservation storage criteria. It's a great resource on what to look for in data safeguarding. In fact, there's even a game you can play if you want to work out which criteria best fits your needs. And in fact, I did a whole webinar on data safeguarding, particularly for higher education institutions. And I looked at a whole range of approaches and resources. So if you want the recording of that, then please get in touch. But automation of digital preservation only gets you so far. Preservation needs to be easy to apply to the content that matters, which means you need to get that content into a preservation system. You can look after it and safeguard it. And then you need to be able to get that content out to those people who need to access and use it in the future. So in this diagram, there are sources of content on the left, which includes people and systems such as institutional repositories or content management systems or asset management systems or storage servers. And there are people who want to use that content on the right at some point in the future, and again, and for a range of applications and uses. And the challenge is that those people who want to use that content maybe 5, 10 or 20 years, maybe even longer down the line. The digital preservation sits in the middle, and environments such as Perpetua take care of the long-term aspect. And then integrations help you get content from your systems today into that digital preservation environment so it can be delivered out again to the people who need it in the future. It's quite hard to talk about integrations in general terms. They are quite specific to the types of content you have or the types of users you need to provide that content to. So I thought I'd give you just one example. This is the sort of integration we do with Perpetua. And in this case, it's how we integrate with institutional repositories. So Andrew touched on this earlier. I mean, the idea here is, for example, a researcher can deposit their scholarly outputs into their institutional repository as usual. There might be a mediated workflow for how that work is reviewed and approved, perhaps before publication. And at that point, it's an ideal time to preserve and safeguard that content. And through the integrations we have with institutional repositories in Perpetua, that work would then automatically be copied over so it can go through an automated preservation process. But the key thing here is that the researcher and the administrator, they're doing, what they are normally used to doing day to day using their institutional repository. And digital preservation has been embedded into those normal workflows. So it happens with, really minimal burden on staff who don't have to, sort of manually transfer content over to the preservation system or back again. And we've integrated Perpetua with things like DSpace and ePrints and Haiku and Sigshare and other institutional repositories in exactly that way. So, that's a sort of quick run through some of the areas of good practice, what you should be doing in order to achieve effective digital preservation. The next bit of the webinar sort of brings me nicely onto the Perpetua approach and how we support that digital preservation good practice. So Perpetua is a hosted software solution that supports long-term data lifecycle management for a wide range of digital content types. So Perpetua is designed to support all of those activities in that circular digital curation center lifecycle picture I showed right at the beginning. And the way that we do that is through a modular architecture with software components or modules that support the various stages of that lifecycle. And we have modules for safeguarding and preservation and making content accessible, as well as achieving compliance and integrating with external environments and applications. And because it's modular, Perpetua users can pick out the specific modules that they need at their particular time when they're on this journey through digital preservation. So in other words, we enable that idea of being able to start simple and work up through those sort of maturity levels that I talked about in the NDSA levels or the DPC RAM model. And we combine those modules into automated workflows, which means we can run end-to-end preservation, safeguarding, and access with really minimal user intervention. which helps staff within the library, for example, to make very efficient use of their time. And all of that is underpinned by a comprehensive approach to data safeguarding. And there we go straight for the top level of the NDSA and RAM models for bitstream preservation. So we include the ability to make multiple copies of content, store them in different geographic locations, regularly check the fixity. And that enables us to provide a contractual guarantee of data integrity. And that's backed by insurance. And the safeguarding solution includes sort of built-in exit plans, including data escrow. And we use open standards to do that, so there's absolutely no vendor lock-in. And then, through a set of integrations, we extend Perpetua out into the wider environment. So this is about the thing I was talking about, the ability to transfer content into the digital preservation environment and then deliver it back out for access and discovery. And indeed, through those integrations with external systems, we can then make sort of valuable digital content available to a wide range of audiences. And so, for example, through our partnership with EBSCO, content can be discovered through the EBSCO Discovery Service, and we're currently working on how Perpetua can be used within the Folio Open Library Services platform. So that's hopefully giving you sort of a very high-level idea of what Perpetua can do. What I wanted to do finally is just show you what that looks like in practice. We'll save a full product demonstration for a follow-on webinar when we have more time to take you through live what it's like to use the Perpetua system. So today what I'm going to do is give you a flavour of what's possible through some screenshots. I'm going to start with the end results. And I'm going to start with one of our Perpetua customers. And this is a screenshot from the public face of the University of Westminster's Records and Archives here in the UK. And the University of Westminster, well, they use Perpetua to preserve and manage and safeguard and provide access to their special collections. And they provide access over the web. So this is the public front end of their archives. And if, for example, I pick one of those collections, so the China Visual Arts Project that I've circled in red, then I can, for example, click through to there and see a carousel of all the digital items in that collection. On the left-hand side, the collection has been arranged hierarchically, and there are also multiple ways to search and navigate the items in the collection. So, for example, I can click on one of these posters, and then I'll be taken to the full record. So that includes all the metadata. I can download a high-resolution version of the poster if I want. And all those access versions, thumbnails, medium resolution, full resolution, they've all been created automatically by Perpetua from an original TIFF scan of the paper poster. And once I've found something like this, I can also go around and I can search and navigate for related items, so things according to related people or places or subjects and events, for example, as shown on the right. And I click through there and I can get a set of search facets down the left and a whole load of matching records on the right. So hopefully by using Westminster as an example for their public archive, you can see how the front end of Perpetua makes it really easy for users to search and find and use archive content. And they can do that over the long term because we manage that content to make sure it's preserved and safeguarded as well. So how did that actually happen? How did we get to the point where we had all this digital content surfaced in front end so it was easy to access and use? Well, it starts with a set of digital objects and metadata that you need to preserve. So just as Andrew talked about. And I'm going to show you the process based on a demo we did recently of Perpetua at the IPRES International Digital Preservation Conference. And there was a day-long event at IPRES called the Great Digital Preservation Bake-Off. And the organisers provided a data set for digital preservation for vendors to use to demonstrate their solutions. And the data set included a wide range of content, some of which was designed to reflect some quite tricky real-world challenges of doing digital preservation. And that data set's on the left, and it contains images and video and audio and documents and emails and more. And the Perpetua dashboard is shown on the right. An ingest into Perpetua is simple. You drag and drop files from your local file system into Perpetua using a web browser, which is shown by the little red circle. If you've got large data sets, then you can do it by things like secure FTP or WebDAV, but that's pretty much it. You've got original content, you bundle it up, you drop it onto Perpetua's dashboard, and the rest of the process is fully automated. So content, once it goes into Perpetua, is automatically replicated to multiple geographic locations, and it undergoes 60 checks. So we have automated bitstream preservation with the results available in fixity reports. So there's a dashboard that gives you an idea of storage usage, and that's shown at the top. And then there's detailed reports of replication and fixity checking shown at the bottom. So that safeguards the content. We then do things like automated metadata extraction. So some of those documents in the data set at the top, we can do things like extract authors and so on. And then after extraction, we put the content through a full digital preservation process. So we actually use Arkivum as our digital preservation engine. And that allows files to undergo file format identification and characterization and validation and normalization, and then packaging into both archive information packages and dissemination information packages. And that follows the OIS model. And the important thing here is, we through Arkivum, we bundle up lots of those different tools for doing digital preservation and enable them to be run as part of an automated workflow. And then we embed that whole digital preservation process within our end-to-end safeguarding, preservation and access solution. So for example, the report at the bottom shows some of the documents in the bake-off data set, and they've been identified, so you can see their file format, and they've been normalized, so they've been converted into PDF. And that's actually one of the areas where we've extended Arkivum to give it extra capabilities that aren't available out of the box. And Perpetua can identify about 1,000 different file formats using the pronom registry, and we've got conversions for well over 300 of those into both long-term preservation and easy to access over the web formats. And those conversions include images, video, audio, office documents, emails, and other content types. And the preservation versions of those files, including the originals, they get bundled up in an archive information package that's automatically safeguarded, and it includes a premise and METS record of everything that was done, and all the metadata that goes with those files is included in the METS. It's very much an open standards way of storing metadata for the long term. And those AIPs follow Baggett bags, and they're safely stored. And then we get sort of back to where we started with the Westminster example. This is what happens to the access version of the content. It's uploaded automatically to the front end of the system. So on the left is a carousel for the bake-off data set. It's just like the one I showed for Westminster. And you get thumbnail versions of all the content, including all the office documents, which we've automatically converted to PDF for easy access. And you can navigate the collection and you can pick specific items to view. So for example, on the right is a PowerPoint presentation that we've also automatically converted to PDF for online access. Here's another example. In this case, it's some of the multilingual documents in the data sets, and we've automated conversion into PDFA. And here we've included things like converting proprietary fonts into open source versions and embedding those into the PDFA. But what was actually originally a Microsoft document with licensed fonts has now become both unencumbered and much more portable through the use of PDF and open source fonts. In the case of email, it's a little bit more complex. I mean, this is a EST email archive, and we converted into both MBOX and EML versions for preservation. And then for access, I mean, we've done things like extract the attachments and convert the PST into a hierarchical set of folders. So all the emails are viewable, again, using PDF. So you can see the individual emails in the PST file in your browser without the need for any email software anymore. So it's really easy to access. The attachments are extracted and then normalized as well. So documents and presentations become PDF. So here there's a premise presentation that happened to be attached to one of the emails. And you can see that presentation. And we also full text index all the content in the front end of the system, including emails and attachments, which means that we can then make that index available over a search API or harvesting via OIPMH. And that allows us to integrate with things like discovery services. This screenshot is actually EBSCO's discovery service. And I've done a search at the top of premise. And by the way, if you don't know what premise is, it's a digital preservation metadata standard. And you can see some journal results immediately below. And then a little bit further down the list comes the matching results from Perpetua. On the left, inside EBSCO's discovery service, you can see a carousel of the matching items for my query in Perpetua. And if I click on one of those, then I'm automatically taken across to see the full item inside Perpetua. Still delivered over the web, and so it's a sort of seamless search, discovery, and access workflow. And that kind of takes us, kind of full circle to where we were a few minutes ago with the Westminster archive. So hopefully now you can got a better feel, a glimpse at least, of how you can go from what was essentially just a bunch of files that you might have locked away somewhere on a local drive or server, through to that content having been safeguarded, preserved, and most importantly, as Andrew said, made accessible for people who need to find and use that content in the future. That's really what Perpetua is about, is automating those workflows, integrating with external systems, and then supporting all of the good practice for doing digital preservation that I talked about earlier. So being able to start simple and work up, and really build an effective preservation solution that meets your particular requirements and enable you to grow that preservation solution over time. So I'm going to stop there. I've talked quite a lot and quite quickly, so I think now is probably a good time to stop for questions and get some feedback and comments from you guys.
Yes, and we have a lot of really great questions in the Q&A, and audience members out there. We do still have some time, so if you have one, make sure to shoot a note in that Q&A window. And I just have to say, before I move into the Q&A, having worked with evaluating information management software in a previous life, I fully well see why this software is so important and why EBSCO would be very excited to have a partnership with us. It was exciting. Thank you. So let me jump into some questions. I think this was mentioned early on about Perpetua being fully managed, but Rebecca from Our Lady of the Lake is asking, are customers able to self-host?
Yes. So Perpetua, we've got several deployment models that we can support. So it can be deployed on-premise, and we've got several customers where Perpetua is running inside their organization on their hardware, for example. We still provide it as a managed service, so we make sure that the whole software stack is up and running and maintained and monitored and upgraded and so on. But it can be run on-premise. We typically host it on top of public cloud, for example, Amazon Web Services or Azure, and we can deploy it in various different geographic locations that way. Or it can be deployed in a private cloud model. So if you've already got other services in data centers, and then we can co-locate Perpetua with those services by running on hardware inside those data centers. There's quite a lot of flexibility, but in all cases, it's a managed service, but it has flexible deployment models.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's one from Paige at the Snowden Library. Andrew indicated that this product is open source, and Matthew, I think you explained quite a bit of that. Does that mean my institution can write add-ons for some specific aspect we may want, but Perpetua doesn't currently provide?
The answer to that is pretty much yes. So the Arkivum solution, Perpetua, includes quite a wide range of open source components. So we use Archivematica for our digital preservation engine. We also use access to memory for the front end of the system for those organizations who want to follow international archiving standards like ISAT-G. And then within things like the digital preservation part of the solution, it is possible to extend the preservation rules or preservation policies, if you like. So if there isn't support out of the box for a given file format, then we can add tools in to support those file formats. And what we'll do is we typically work with the client to understand what file formats need to be supported, what tools could be used, what significant properties need to be maintained in the conversion. We'll sort of do the technical bits of deploying those tools into the environment and embedding them into the workflows, and then we work with our clients to sort of do user acceptance testing and confirm that they're doing the right job. So yes, the solution is extensible, and the way that we do that is working closely with our customers to make those extensions or configuration changes.
Okay, great. I do have a couple questions about the types of things that get included in preservation. Katie from LaSalle University is asking, does Perpetua preserve folder structure or /folder content?
Yes, we do. So if you have a set of files, folders, sort of arranged, content that's been arranged in a set of folders, and you import all of that, we call it a content management package. So you've got your folders, your files, and any metadata that goes with it, then you can import that whole bundle into Perpetua, and we will maintain that folder structure. So that's physically how content is organized. So you can, for example, search by folder names or file names and retrieve it that way. But equally, we do allow that content to be organized and arranged from a logical point of view. For example, different levels of description for, archival descriptions following ISAT-G, or you can use, we support internally the Portland Common Data Model, so you can also arrange your content in terms of file objects and collections. So physical files and folders, yes, we allow those to be imported and maintained, but it's also possible to, in addition, logically organize, arrange, and present content as well.
Okay, excellent. And here's another one from Paul at Lindenwood University. He says, at my institution, our student newspaper is all digital. Does Perpetua capture websites for preservation?
That's something where we would often look to partner with another organization that provides that. So there are specialist tools and organizations that do, for example, web crawling. So there's Archive.it, there's MirrorWeb, for example. We would look after, for example, walk files, which are the results of web capture, and ensure those are safeguarded and preserved. But we might work with an external partner for the capture of those websites and then the delivery back. On our roadmap, we're looking at doing some of that stuff ourselves by using freely available web crawlers or things like Web Recorder. But at the moment, capture of websites or social media and then delivery back will be done in partnership with an organization who specializes in that area.
Okay, great, thank you. And now I've got a few questions about integrations. Emma from Augustana College is asking, can you just say a bit more about how Perpetua can integrate with Archives space?
Yeah, so we have an integration with Archive Space. We do that for some of our customers. And there it depends on what you want to do. For example, whether you want to create Archive Space records from within Perpetua, or whether you want to take the results of Perpetua and then transfer it over to Archive Space. So transferring over metadata that might have been extracted or transferring over links to digital objects where we've generated preservation and access versions. So this is sort of an example of there are different workflows for how digital preservation can be integrated with archive information management systems and cataloging systems. And then there are different models that we can support. I'm happy to sort of follow up on that one offline for more information on exactly the workflows that we support.
Excellent, thank you. Here's another one from Mark at Derbyshire County. How compatible is this approach with use of an EDRM system such as Open Text Content Server?
So that again, it depends on whether you want to migrate or transfer content out of the EDRMS, so OpenText, into a preservation environment, or whether you want to connect the two things together. So, for example, have records in the EDRMS and put your digital content through Perpetua, for example, to create preservation access versions, and then put links or references to that content back in the EDRMS. I mean, we're working with customers, including with OpenText, on those models. So, for example, one of our clients is doing bulk exports of their records from OpenText, including digital objects, as XML, which is then transferred over to Perpetua along with the digital files. And then we will take that XML and digital files in, map the metadata over to whatever schema is necessary, whether it's ISRG or Dublin Core or some custom schema, and then import the digital objects. So we have experience of working with OpenText, but again, exactly what sort of integration is used, this depends on what sort of workflow you want and what you want to achieve.
Okay, excellent. And I'll probably ask one more question that speaks a little bit to the background of Arkivum, but I would like to remind everybody that if we didn't get to your question today, everything will be forwarded to our presenters. So like as Matthew said, anything that requires follow-up can be handled after the webinar. And you'll also be presented with a survey in a new tab, just 3 quick questions, if you don't mind. Please take a moment to answer those. One of them is asking if you would like a personalized demo of Perpetua. So if you would, let us know. And Matthew, my final question is from Drake at UCU. Can you speak to the current version of Perpetua and Arkivum and the number of years you've had this up and running?
Okay, so I mean, Arkivum, I'm one of the founders, so I've been with the business from the outset. We started life early 2011. so we're a bit over 8 years old. We started out with data safeguarding, and then over the years we built on top of that digital preservation and access and the whole sort of integrated stack and software as a service delivery model. Our current version is 5.2. That's the one that we have in production at the moment for customers. And we soon have a new version, 5.3, that's about to be released. And that gives me a good excuse to plug a webinar that Arkivum did just over a week ago that does a deep dive into all the product features of 5.3. And we'd certainly be very happy to do a follow-up webinar to this one to give you, a really good insight into what our current product can do. I'm kind of conscious that going rapidly through a series of screenshots and gave you just a flavour of what's possible.
Okay, great. I look forward to hearing more about future releases and perhaps doing a live demo myself. And for anybody out there, here is Matthew's contact information. If you would like to learn more, I agree. Digital preservation is totally awesome. And thanks so much, Matthew, for sharing as many details as you could today. And thank you, Andrew, for setting the stage. And of course, thank you to everyone who attended today and shared your time with us. Of course, this webcast will be archived, and you'll get an email in about 24 hours with a link if you'd like to watch it again. You can find this webcast and all other upcoming and archived webcasts in the Events and PD section at libraryjournal.com. Thanks so much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you next time.